Levi Brackman here with Truth, Jewish Wisdom for Today. This week, I debated backwards and forwards with myself about whether I should do the regular podcasts about the Kabbalah, and I wanted to move on to talk about the Tzimtzum, or the Great Contraction, and it coincided with this week's Torah portion of Bereshit. But given the terrible week that we, the Jewish people, have had, what happened in Israel, the savage, murderous, genocidal attack on Jews in southern Israel this week, I just don't feel that it's the right thing to just move on as if business as usual. And therefore this week I wanted to spend some time in this episode talking about what's going on in Israel, what's happened in the past week, and some reflections about what all this is about. Now, obviously it goes without saying that this has been incredibly hard as a Jew and as someone who loves the Jewish people and loves humanity. To watch what's gone on is being incredibly difficult. I have forced myself to look at the images and the videos that have come out from the savagery, the genocidal maniacs of these terrorists. And the Nazis, ISIS, is not even, there has to be a new category for the kind of barbarism that these people unleashed against innocent men, women, and children and babies. This is a depravity that humanity literally has never seen before. This is something brand new, and it's been soul-destroying to look at those images because it's just sheer horror. But I forced myself to because it's important for all of us to know the kind of evil that is out there. And the fact that these are people who just want every Jew dead, and I'm Jewish. Whatever they did to those people there, they want to do to me and to my family and to the people I love, to my community. This is personal, deeply personal. And it's clear to me that anyone in the world who supports this in any kind of way or creates any kind of excuses for why this could happen is complicit in the desire to commit genocide against me, my family, and my people. It's really binary that way. You're either opposed to this kind of savagery or you're complicit in it. There's no middle ground in my view. I've been very heartened by the outpouring of support from friends of mine who I've done business with and who I'm associated with in the larger community out there. People have texted me, messaged me, called me, and just people stopped me in the street telling me how much they feel for us. And I'm greatly appreciative of this. This is a very hard time to be a Jew in the world today. I just wanted to express that. On the other hand, this is different. This is different than the times before when Jews have been attacked. It was only 80 years ago that my grandparents' entire family were wiped out, totally destroyed and killed in the Holocaust. They were marched out of their homes, taken to the outskirts of the city, and they were told that they were going to be taken somewhere, and then they were gunned down, men, women, and children, by the Nazis. That was in Latvia. Not to mention my grandfather's entire extended family in Hungary that were all killed by the Nazis, as well as my grandmother's family in Germany, all murdered by the Nazis. So we Jews are very intimately familiar with being hunted down and killed by people who hate us. We're familiar with that type of hatred. As a young child, I recall vividly, I lived in London, and I walked from my house to the corner which was a very short 30, 40-second walk. And on the corner there was a gas station. It's now turned into a block of flats, apartment building. And I went to buy some soda, a can of soda, and dry roasted peanuts. That was my favorite as a kid. I liked dry roasted peanuts and a can of soda. So I used to tell my mom, hey, I'm going down to, we used to call it the garage, because in England, a gas station is called a garage. So I'm going down to the garage to buy dry roasted peanuts and a fizzy drink. And as I got there, there was this kid about my age standing there, and he was Irish, because I could tell he had an Irish accent, and he was asking the person behind the desk, the shopkeeper, for chips, what we call crisps in England. And it was clear that he wasn't able to read what it said on there, because he said that he wanted cheese and onion, and on it said salt and vinegar. So the Bangladeshi guy behind the desk was trying to tell him, hey, no, that you want salt and vinegar, but this is cheese and onion. And he was getting frustrated. They didn't understand each other, because the Bangladeshi fellow had a very strong Bangladeshi accent. So I chipped in and I told the guy, no, that's salt and vinegar. I was trying to be helpful. And he looked at me and he said to me, you Jew, you dare talk to me. And I was like, what? And I looked Jewish. I had the kippah on, obviously, and I was a Jewish kid. And he said to me, because you spoke to me, I'm going to beat you up. And he was saying this outright in front of the Bangladeshi guy. And he said, I'm going to beat you up. And then the Bangladeshi guy basically kicked him out, and I stayed there. And the Bangladeshi guy, who was a very kind fellow, said to me, look, stay around here a little bit. Wait till he's gone and then go home. Again, it was a short walk distance to my house. So that's what I did. I stayed around for about 10 minutes. And then I started walking home, and there they were waiting on the corner. But it wasn't just him. It was him and another kid, a bigger kid, waiting for me. I tried to rush the 30 seconds home, and they caught up to me, literally 2 doors from my house. And they start telling me that because you're Jewish, you dare have spoken to me, and I'm gonna teach you a lesson for dare speaking to me. Dare a Jew talk to this illiterate kid who couldn't even read that it didn't say salt and vinegar, it said cheese and onion on the packet of crisps. I realized that I'm outnumbered and they're going to beat me up. So I turned around to them and said to them, look, you want to fight with me? I'll fight with you. And I got into a fighting stance. 9, 10-year-old kid. I said, I'll fight you. And I've always felt this, that I won't back away from a fight as a Jew. And so I said, so we'll fight. They looked at me and they said, you know what? All right, let's not fight. And I fell for the oldest trick in the book. He said, let's be friends. And he gave me his handshake, and I fell for it. I thought that for a moment, that he wanted to be friends with me. And I took him to shake his hand, and as I went to shake his hand and I had my hands down, both of them pounded me with punches. And I started screaming, and they ran off. And I went home. It's black eye or whatever. I called the police. Of course, the police did nothing about it. But in that moment, I realized, as I was standing there in front of these kids, I realized in that moment what it meant to be hated because you're Jewish, and there's nothing you can do about it. What it meant to be hated because you have an identity. You were born a certain way. And you have people who are totally illiterate, and you can't reason with them. The hatred is so strong, is so deep-seated, that you can't reason with it. And they just want to hurt you. They just want to hurt you. I've had numerous other experiences with anti-Semitism throughout my life, and I could go through one after the other. I've had it in Ukraine. I had it in Copenhagen. I had it in other parts of Europe. And I experienced it in the United States to a much lesser degree. But this kind of anti-Semitism, this kind of Jew hatred exists, and it's alive and well. Of course, I also experienced it in Israel, from Arabs in Israel. And it runs deep. And it's an irrational hatred. And there's nothing you can do to talk people out of this kind of hatred. They just have it in them. Hatred is such that it's corrosive. So what I wanted to talk about today is where this comes from. What is the source of this hatred? And what we can do to combat it. And the first and most important thing is to always call it out. Always call it out. Never allow hatred to fester. In my home, I don't put up with hatred towards anybody or any people. And my kids know that. Because one just can't, one can't walk around with hate in one's heart. It's so negative. Just like hate, according to Judaism, it says, Sina makakalas ashura, that hatred, it says, doesn't allow one to think straight. You can't be rational when you're full of hatred. Love is the same thing. They're both like mirror images of each other, love and hate. Love can be such a strong force for good. And hate can be such a strong force for destruction. There are certain things that one can hate, not other people. One can hate evil. It's actually good to hate evil. King David in the Psalms said it. He hated evil. So evil is a good thing to hate. You can harbor hatred in your heart for evil. Evil, despicable acts. You can have a revulsion towards it. And then you know how to combat it. That doesn't mean hate people, but it means to hate the evil that exists. You can be revolted by that kind of evil. And one ought to be. And revulsion brings to hatred. And it's important to focus on that. I'll get back to that in a minute. The idea of revulsion leading to hatred, because it works the other way. When you become revolted by people, you can become to hate them. And that's one of the strategies of these Nazis, of these anti-Semites. It starts off to teach people how to become revolted by Jews. And then there's a short step from that revulsion to total and utter hatred, and the dehumanization thereafter, and then the murder and killing and maiming and raping, etc. that takes place shortly after that. It's only a few short steps. So one has to be very careful about hatred towards people. So in my home, I don't allow any hatred towards people to go on. I call it out every single time. But I also call out anti-Semitism when I see it. I recall very vividly, I was in the gym one day when I lived in Colorado. And I was in the locker room. And in that gym, they had these locker rooms that were like cubicles. So we could go in and get changed, etc. They had a shower in there. And I'm standing in there, the door's closed, and I hear someone making a joke about Jews. Pretty disgusting joke. I was immediately disgusted and angry about it. I walked right out and I confronted the guy. Anyone who knows him, I'm about 5'7". This guy was about 6'6". He was really tall, big guy. It was a CrossFit gym. And in that moment, I didn't care. I didn't care how big he was. I confronted the guy and I said to him, "You do not make jokes like that about Jews." And I got in his face about it, and he didn't like that. And, "Oh, you guys are so sensitive." I said, "You bet we're sensitive. We're incredibly sensitive to it. After 6 million of us were killed 80 years ago, we're very sensitive to it. And we ought to be. We ought to confront it wherever it rears its head. Unfortunately, we Jews, we're the ones who have to stand up to it. We're very grateful to the United States and the American people and the American government and members of Congress who are standing strong with Israel against this hate and against this barbarism. Incredibly grateful. It's important to understand that's an anomaly in our history. It's an anomaly in our history that we've had, as Jews, such good friends, such strong friends who are willing to stand up for us. I'm incredibly grateful, personally grateful, to President Biden for standing so tall and strong with Israel and with the Jewish people. I'm moved by it. I think we're all moved by it, because this is not something which has happened to us in our history. We were just led like sheep to the slaughter in the past. This time, as I said, is different, because we have an army. We have warriors. We have fighters. We have tanks, we have missiles, we have planes. And we have the backing of the United States of America. Jews don't turn the cheek anymore. Jews fight back. And in the end of the day, we have no one else truly to protect us other than ourselves. It's why you see the entire Jewish community worldwide coming together. Because you attack one, you attack us all. We understand what's at stake. We've experienced it. That pain of loss is embedded in our DNA. We understand inherently the danger of this hatred. And we understand that it needs to be confronted. But I want to focus a little bit about where this hatred comes from, why humans have it. As I mentioned, it is irrational. But it starts from a discontent. We humans, we can look at things in one of two ways. We can either be happy with what we have and satisfied with it, even if we don't have a little. We can say we're grateful that we have a little, whatever it is that we have. The Jewish sages say in Ethics of the Fathers, he who is wealthy is one who is happy with what he has, happy with his lot. You don't need to look into other people's plate. As kids, we would sit around there and we would say, my brother has more than me. It's not fair. And a good parent always says, look at your own plate, don't look at other people's plates. There are people in the world who have an inability to be satisfied with what they have, and they're constantly looking at other people's plates. And they constantly want more. The thing about that is, that never changes. Even when you get more, you're still never satisfied. You're still never happy with it, because it's a hole inside you that you're trying to fill. And that hole is impossible to fill. It's interesting that in the Bible, in the Torah, there's this story about Bilam and Balak, where Balak was a king, and he wanted to destroy the Jews who were in the desert at the time, on their way to the Promised Land. This is a biblical story. So he tried to bring in the help of a prophet who could curse the Israelites. So he brought in this prophet who was called Bilam. And Bilam spoke to God, and God said, you can't curse them, because they are people who are blessed. The Jewish people are inherently blessed, and therefore they can't be cursed. God insisted, and he brought them along anyway. In the end, Bilam ended up blessing the children of Israel. And one of the blessings he gave was, Ma tova ha'lecha Yaakov mishkanotech Yisrael. How goodly your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. As he was overlooking and seeing the tents of the Israelites and how they dwelled. And what he saw, according to the Midrash, was that the tents of the Israelites as they dwelled, the openings, the doors, didn't face the doors of the other people, but they faced the back of the tent of the other people. So they weren't able to look into each other's doors. When one opened their door, they saw the back of the other tent, rather than the door of the other tent. The tents weren't facing each other. And my interpretation of this story is that what he saw was that they weren't looking into each other's tents to see, oh, does this one have more than I have? Each one lived in their own way, satisfied with what they had. They weren't looking into the other person's. And in that moment, this prophet, this Gentile prophet, he realized that the way in which you can live in peace is if you're satisfied with who you are. If you are a person who feels at peace with who you are and what you have in the world and your lot in the world, then you can be at peace with other people. But if you're constantly looking at what you don't have, then you're constantly going to want from the other person. And whatever the other person has is a threat to you. because they're inevitably going to have something you don't have, and you're going to want that thing. And therefore, because you don't have it, you're going to resent that other person for having it. And eventually you're going to hate them. And hate is a short step from dehumanization, which is a short step from the barbarism we saw last weekend. With the Israelites, they're blessed people. They don't look at other people. Judaism is not a religion that looks to convert others. Jews are just happy being Jews. We don't resent that other people are Christians or Muslims. We're happy that they have their religion. We have ours. We're not seeking to convert anybody else. We're happy with who we are. That's a fundamental idea that has been given to democracies. Democracies also, as countries, don't look to expand their borders and fight with their neighbors and take over their neighbors. They're inherently happy with who they are. And so why democracies don't usually fight with each other and don't usually get in wars against other democracies. Because ultimately people are not looking necessarily to expand their power. They're okay with what they have. That is an idea which comes from Judaism. And democracies have taken on that idea. It's an idea which allows for peacefulness. It's an idea which allows people not to grow hatred for other people who have more than them or have something different than they have. If you think about authoritarian regimes, however, just think about modern-day Russia. They're not happy with what they have. They're constantly looking over their shoulder at what other people have and wanting that. That's why they invade other countries. That's why they've invaded Ukraine. Because authoritarian regimes, they have a different fundamental understanding of the world. They're not driven by this Judaic value of Ezehu Asher HaSomech B'Chalko. He who is wealthy is one who is happy with their lot. That's such a fundamental concept in Judaism. And it's an idea which has pervaded the Western world and the world of democratic countries. But it's one which is lost in all these authoritarian regimes and authoritarian type groups. They want expansionism. They're never happy with what they have. For them, it's all about power. It's not about any kind of inner peace. It's all about what they can take from others, because they think that somehow will fill the void that is in their soul, the darkness, the evil. That is the evil. The evil, which is so deep, is that they've got a darkness in their soul because they're not happy with who they are and what they've got. They'll never be happy. So they look at others and they see others have more than them and they want to destroy that. They want to take that. But it's never going to end there. We know that. We get that. That someone with that attitude, it never ends there. They're always going to want more and more. At some point, good people have to stop it and say, no, this can't fester. Because if you're a person who's happy with your lot and you're okay with what you have, and there's other people who will want to have an expansionist ideology, then at some point, unless you defend what you have, they're going to take it. It's just the way it's going to be. So you have to be willing to defend what you have. That doesn't mean you want to expand, but somehow you have to defend what you have. And therefore fight against that kind of hatred. And if you think about, and this isn't a Judaism or Christian and Judaism against Islam thing. It's got nothing to do with that. Because in Islam, you have this kind of concept of Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. So really in Islam, they look at the world in basically two categories. Islamic consecrated land, which is any land which has been conquered by an Islamic army at any time. That becomes Dar al-Islam. And then there's the rest of the world, which hasn't yet been conquered by, according to them, by Muslim armies, and that's considered to be Dar al-Harb, which means the land of the sword. In other words, sometime in the future, to be conquered by a Muslim army and to become a Muslim country. Now, that's their ideas, which are found in the Quran. Now, there are plenty of ideas in the Bible, which are also, one might look at and say that they're troubling. The question is how people behave with these ideas. So mostly, if you look at Judaism, some of the more troubling ideas that come out of the Torah, most Jews say today, they're just not applicable today. That's not how we behave today. So in some way or other, we found ways to say, yes, that's in the Torah, but we just don't behave that way. A classic example is the idea of the Ben Sora Umorer, which is the rebellious son and the rebellious child. The idea is if you have a child who's very rebellious, then you actually go and kill the child. That's never been enacted. Yes, it's in the scripture, but basically the ideas around it and the rules around it have been written in such a way that it's just never been enacted, and it's impossible for it to be enacted. And there are plenty of examples exactly like that. Peaceful people will look at some of those ideas, maybe ideas which could be considered barbaric, and they just won't behave according to them. They'll find a way around it to ensure that those just are never instituted and never carried out. And most of the Muslim world is the same way. Most of the Muslim world just don't believe in this kind of jihad, fighting to conquer land. They just don't believe in it. Not that it's not in their scriptures, but it's not something that they're doing today. They're not saying this is something we have to do today. They consider jihad an internal struggle, becoming more spiritual, becoming a better person, and they're just not doing that. They're not expanding their land. And as a matter of fact, you have a lot of Muslim countries today which, even though they consider Israel to be Dar al-Islam, they don't consider it any kind of commandment to go and conquer Israel. They're happy to make peace with Israel. And that's what most good people are like. They're going to reread the scripture in a way in which it can be read in a peaceful way where people can coexist. And then you have people who will read the scripture in the most barbaric way possible. That tells us more about the people than the scripture. And so therefore, I don't see a difference really between authoritarian regimes like Putin's regime, which is willing to go out there and basically, wipe out entire villages for no reason whatsoever than rather their expansionist desires. And Hamas. The Russian army is somewhat similar to Hamas. And you have these people, it's an expansionism which they want. Now Hamas is more brutal than the Russian army, without a doubt. But what underlies it is this inability for people to be able to be satisfied with what they have. As soon as you look at others, and what you don't have, and the hole in your soul and heart is reflected in what other people have, and you have an inability to be satisfied with what you have, you become bitter, and bitter then turns to hate. So it's really important to understand that this is, and then an ideology can go around that, and that's what happens. That's what Nazism is. They're all expansionists. They're all a reflection of this illness that people have within them, that they're unable to just be happy with what they have and with who they are. Not to this, the extreme of it. The extreme of that is what happened last Saturday. And we as Jews, we need to be a light unto the nations. Part of being a light unto the nations is twofold. Number one is trying to teach this idea of be satisfied with who you are. And in many ways, the Torah has been successful at that, because these are ideas which have been imbibed by the major democracies of the world. On the other hand, though, if in order for democracies and people who are satisfied with what they have to survive, they need to be able to and have the courage and conviction and strength and military power to combat those expansionist powers, those people who aren't satisfied with what they have and are willing to do whatever it takes to take what you have to fill their thirst for more, which will never be satiated, ever. So it has to be stopped. And what the Israeli army are doing now is they're fighting that truly righteous war. This isn't one of these wars where they're trying to expand. Israel has no desire to expand its borders, or the vast majority of Israelis have no desire to expand their borders. They have no desire to take over other people's land. They just want to live in peace in the land that they have. They want good relationships with their neighbors. They want to do commerce with their neighbors. They would be delighted if the Palestinians had a prosperous country on their doorstep, and they would do business together, and it would be glorious. That is the truth about the vast majority, I would say 98% of Israelis. There's no expansionist desire there whatsoever. There's only a desire for peace. We're happy with what we have. You just be happy with what you have. Make that great. That is truly, truly the nature of the Jewish people and Israeli people, which are one. But in order, if you have a neighbor which is not that way, you have to be willing to stand up to it. You have to be willing to do what it takes to stop them taking what's yours. And if you don't, then you will not continue to, you will cease existing, because they will take it. And that's what we saw this last weekend. Israel has a responsibility and an obligation to do what it's doing in Gaza. None of us enjoy it. None of us relish this. Israel did whatever it could to its own detriment to ensure that this day would never come, that they would never have to go into Gaza and take care of it like they're taking care of it today. But they have no choice. It's really that simple. This has to be confronted. It's a moral obligation, and it is a righteous war. And because of that, they will prevail. That's just the art of history. As Martin Luther King said, it arcs towards justice. And the world can't go back, and it won't go back. And as long as you have these positive ideas which exist, and people are willing to fight for them and give their lives for them, there is bright hope for the future of this country and of this world. And this week I've seen the Israeli people come together as one in a way which few could have foreseen. There were such fractures in the Israeli society. No fractures anymore in this. For a righteous war, they're coming together. The Western world, the good world, the democracy of this world are coming together to face this evil. To ensure that this kind of evil, which threatens us all, as I've mentioned, is pushed back and stopped. And this is what has to happen. It hurts my heart greatly for all the innocent lives that are going to be lost. My brothers and sisters in the Israeli army, which are going to have to fight this evil. And the suffering that is going on in Israel is torturous for me as a Jew. It brings me no delight to see the suffering on the other side either. But make no mistake about it, this is a righteous war that Israel is fighting, and America is standing alongside them together with the other allies in Europe. I'm very grateful for that. Hope next week to be able to go back to talking about the Tzimtzum. This is a somber week. Let's hope that we hear good news soon. This has been Levi Brackman with Truths, Jewish Wisdom for Today. Until next time.